Every man in that village believed the same thing. That speed was strength. That the fastest horse won. That if you weren't running, you were losing. They were all wrong. And it took a single dry summer and one old, slow donkey to prove it. The valley of Saran sat between two mountains, far from any city, close to the kind of life where mornings start before dawn and evenings end in silence. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where pride traveled fast and reputation clung to you like morning fog. And in that village there was a farmer named Elias, a quiet man with a patched coat, cracked boots, and a donkey so old and slow that the children called him Stone Foot. His real name was gray all over, unhurried in every step, the kind of animal that seemed to be in no argument with time at all. Every morning, Elias would walk beside Gree down the long dirt road toward the market or the upper fields. No rush, no command, just two old figures moving through golden light, fog lifting around their feet, the world waking slowly all around them. The other farmers would pass them, always, young horses with strong legs and proud owners who sat tall in their carts. The wheels would kick dust into Elias's face as they sped by. And more than once, a man would laugh from his seat and call back over his shoulder. "Still walking, old man? At that pace you'll arrive tomorrow." Elias never answered. He just walked, and Gree just walked beside him. But something was coming, something none of those fast men had planned for. The summer of that year arrived with a cruelty no one expected. By the middle of July, the rains had stopped completely. The river that fed the valley narrowed to a thin silver thread. The soil turned gray and hard. Crops that should have been tall and green stood short and pale in the heat. And the animals suffered most of all. The strong horses, the ones that had spent all spring racing back and forth between fields and markets and wells, began to break down. One collapsed on the road east of the village. Two more fell sick with exhaustion before the month was out. Their owners stood in the heat beside these magnificent animals and could do nothing but wait. The fastest had gone too fast for too long, and now they had nothing. But every morning during those dry, terrible weeks, before the heat became unbearable, Elias was already on the road. Same pace, same path, same quiet donkey beside him. He never overloaded Gree, never pushed him into the heat of midday, never demanded more than the old animal could give with ease. They moved like water finding its own level, not rushing, not stopping, simply moving at the pace that was natural and true. The villagers who watched from their windows couldn't explain what they were seeing. A weak man and a slow animal, still moving when the strong ones had stopped. How? There was a woman at the edge of the village whose name was Mara. She was 80 years old and had never left Saran in her life. She sat each evening in a wooden chair outside her door, watching the road the way others watch fire, quietly without needing to explain why. She had seen droughts before. She had seen proud men fall and quiet men rise. She had watched Saran survive things no one thought it could survive. One evening, as Elias passed with Gree after a long day, Mara called to him. "Elias, come here." He stopped, tied Gree gently to the post and sat on the stone step beside her. For a moment, she said nothing. She just looked at the donkey. Then she spoke. "Do you know what most men do wrong?" Elias shook his head. "They borrow from tomorrow," she said. "They push everything they have today, because they believe tomorrow will be generous." She paused. "But tomorrow keeps no promises." Elias looked at Gree standing patiently in the fading light. "I only ever asked him what he had," Elias said quietly. Mara nodded once, slowly, like someone confirming something they had known for a long time. "That," she said, "is rarer than you think." He didn't fully understand her then. Not completely. But those words settled inside him like stones in still water. Because what was coming would give them a meaning he would never forget. In late August, the storm arrived. It was not a gentle storm. It came with force. 3 days of heavy rain that turned the dry valley into a floodplain overnight. The lower road disappeared under mud. A wooden bridge near the valley entrance collapsed entirely into the swollen river below. When the water settled and the mud began to harden, Only one path remained open between Saran and the market town beyond the mountain. A narrow trail that wound up through the rocky hillside, steep in places, tight and uneven underfoot, beautiful in the way that difficult things sometimes are. No horse could walk it, not with a cart, not loaded, not safely, but a donkey could. A slow, steady, unbothered donkey who had never once asked the world to rearrange itself for his comfort. Gree walked those trails the morning after the storm as if he had been born to them. One careful step, then another, reading the ground with each hoof as though he and the mountain were in quiet conversation. And Elias followed beside him. Within days, word spread through the valley. Elias had access to the market. He was the only one. Farmers came to his door in the evenings with their vegetables, their grain sacks, their jars of oil. They asked quietly if Gree could carry what their horses no longer could. Gree carried it all. For 3 weeks, that old gray donkey was the only thread connecting an entire village to the world beyond its mountain walls. The men who had laughed on the road did not laugh now. They stood in their doorways in the early mornings and watched Elias and Gree disappear up the trail into the mist. And something shifted in them that they didn't have easy words for. One evening near the end of September, as the trails were drying and life was slowly returning to normal, a farmer named Doran approached Elias at the village well. Doran was not a small man. He had a broad chest and a voice that was used to filling a room. He had owned 2 of the finest horses in the valley, and he had been, it must be said, among the loudest voices on the road those past years. He stood across from Elias at the well and was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "I need to ask you something," Doran said. His voice was lower than usual. "My horses are stronger, younger. I push them no harder than any man here. And yet they are standing in a field right now while your old donkey just carried this valley through the worst month in a decade." He stopped. "How?" Elias looked at Gree standing by the trough, drinking slowly, completely at peace with everything. "Gree never tried to be something he wasn't," Elias said. Doran frowned. "That's not an answer." "It is," Elias said gently. "Your horses were competing. With my donkey. With each other. With the road. With time. They were always trying to prove something." He paused. "Gree never competed with anything. He just walked his own pace, every day, without bitterness. He never ran himself empty trying to be faster than what he was." Doran stood very still. "And when everything else broke down," Elias continued, "he was still walking, not because he was special, because he was never exhausted." The 2 men stood at the well as the sun went down behind the mountain. And Doran, a proud man who was not used to silence, said nothing at all, because there was nothing to say. Winter came that year cold and clean. Old Mara passed away in November, quietly in her sleep, with the sound of the wind against her window and her wooden chair sitting empty on the porch. The village buried her on a hill above Saran where you could see the long road winding down through the valley. At the gathering, someone read from the small notebook she had kept for years. Not grand philosophy, not scripture, just small observations from a woman who had spent 60 years watching a mountain road. One line in particular was read aloud and then met with a long, complete silence. It said, "The fastest leave the most dust. The steady ones arrive." Elias stood at the back of the crowd when he heard those words, and he felt something move through him that he had no name for. Something between grief and gratitude, between loss and recognition. He thought of every morning he had walked that road and been past. Every time the dust had settled on his coat and the laughter had carried back on the wind. Every quiet night he had lain awake wondering if he was foolish for never pushing harder, for never asking more than Gree could give. He had thought patience was simply endurance. But now he understood something deeper. Patience is not waiting with a calm face while you suffer inside. Patience is a form of wisdom so quiet that most people mistake it for weakness. It is the decision, made again and again every single morning, to trust the pace that is honest, to protect what carries you, to stop borrowing from tomorrow to impress people today. It is the rarest and most powerful thing a person can choose, and almost no one chooses it. Spring returned to Saran the way it always did. Gradually. Then suddenly. Flowers on the hillside, birds on the fence posts, the river full and running clear. New horses were brought to the valley. The bridge was rebuilt. The roads dried out. Life resumed its familiar movement. But Elias still walked the mountain trail every week. Not because he had to, because something had changed in him on those steep, quiet paths. He had learned to see the road differently, to notice the way light came through the trees at midday, to hear the sound the wind made through the grass just before it turned, to feel the satisfaction of arriving somewhere without having burned everything to get there. He had spent years walking this road and seeing nothing. Now he saw everything. Years passed. Gree grew older, slower, if such a thing was possible, and one morning he simply did not rise. Elias sat beside him in the quiet field for a long time, not crying, not speaking, just sitting beside an animal that had, without ever saying a single word, taught him the most important thing he had ever learned. When young men from the village came to Elias later, young men with ambition and urgency and the same hunger he had once seen in all those fast horses, they would sometimes ask him how to get ahead, how to succeed in a world that seemed to reward only the bold and the fast. He would think for a moment. Then he would say something they did not expect. Stop asking how to move faster. Start asking what you are spending yourself on. They would frown. Most people run until they collapse, he would continue, then wonder why they have nothing left for what actually matters. Your energy is not infinite. Your time is not infinite. Use both with honesty. Protect what carries you. Walk your own pace. Not slower than you are, not faster than is true. He would pause. When everything around you breaks from the pressure, you will still be walking. They would nod, still not fully sure they understood. But some of them would carry those words forward. And years later, at some unmarked moment in their own difficult lives, those words would return to them, with the full weight of meaning. Patience is not the absence of ambition. It is ambition with wisdom. It is knowing that the one who protects what carries them will still be walking long after the fastest ones have fallen. You do not need to run. You only need to never stop.